Hi all, I'm Ezrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. Recently I came home from my second stay in Colombia, which this time was for about 4 months. Before I head back though, I thought it'd be good to document what it's like suddenly being away from Colombia after living there for a while. I'd say there's definitely been a bit of a cultural whiplash given how different my country is to Colombia, so let's unpack some of the things I've been missing. As obvious as it may sound, I reckon the weirdest moment in coming home is the day you get back. For me, the moment I walked out of Sydney Airport, it was like I was hyper aware of every little thing that was different to Colombia. It's interesting because usually when you grow up in a country, you almost never really have a moment where you're very consciously aware of your own culture. I mean, you might know about it intellectually, but you never have this visceral feeling where it's immediately apparent at the forefront of your mind just how distinct your country is from other cultures. Because really, it's just the everyday norm for you. It's what you're used to on a deep subconscious level. It's not until you leave your country and visit another that's very different to your own that you really have this more intense realization of your own country's culture and attributes. Regarding Colombia and Australia, one of the first things my attention went to after arriving home was just how quiet everything is. Like in Colombia, you get very used to seeing people out and about all the time, be it street vendors, pedestrians, cyclists, you name it. The roads also seem to be a lot busier with a lot more traffic congestion throughout the country. When you add to that the greater popularity of motorbikes everywhere, I found that Colombia just always feels a lot busier and louder, even in smaller cities and neighborhoods. You might think of this as a downside, and at times it definitely can be. If you want some peace and quiet, that's something I'd say much of Australia has over much of Colombia. But for me personally, this isn't something that really bothers me. On the contrary, I kind of miss the hustle and bustle of Colombia when I'm back here. I know that might sound weird, but what I like is that in Colombia, both the cities and towns always feel kind of alive. It's kind of hard to explain, but I guess it just always feels like there's something going on around you, like there's never a dull moment anywhere. Colombia is obviously a very culturally vibrant country, and I think this is partly what contributes to this. Again, you have street vendors shouting out their wares, you see more people out and about in public, and then in terms of things to see and do, I've noticed there's often a higher density of local restaurants and cafes than there is anywhere in Australia. In fact, now that I mention it, maybe that density has something to do with why everything feels busier. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not that high, but when you compare it to Australia, which is famous for having some of the lowest density cities on the world, it is something I notice. I should also say on that if you're from another country like the US, your mileage may vary here. Interestingly, I've had several comments from US viewers who say that they like to go to Colombia to get away from the hustle and bustle of their own city. So you know, it's obviously all relative. Speaking of cultural vibrancy though, this is something I also miss when it comes to people. Once again, I felt this very soon after coming back, but Australia is a far more individualistic country compared to Colombia, and so a lot of the time you notice that people like to keep to themselves a lot more here. It's not that people are cold, like it's still easy to have a conversation here, but the difference is that there seems to be a higher barrier for forming meaningful relationships in Australia. From my experience, I found that if you really want to get into someone's inner circle here, most of the time you've either got to be a long-time colleague at their workplace or school, or a family member. Maybe this is more the case in Sydney than other cities and towns, but for whatever reason, people seem to have a kind of tunnel vision on their lives here. It's like their whole life is just their work or study or family. If they meet you elsewhere, then you're just someone in their periphery, so it's going to be an uphill battle if you want to graduate to anything deeper. To get a little personal, I'd say that this has been a struggle for me throughout my adult life. I've always craved a meaningful friendship where I feel like I'm really doing life with someone, but this has been difficult to come by. I think this may be due to the fact that most of the people I know are not long-time colleagues, but rather people I've met by other means. As I said, this will often mean that people will keep you more at arm's length, so it's a struggle to go much deeper. In Colombia, on the other hand, people just don't think this way. Not once with any of my Colombian friends have I felt like an outsider, as they're just so much quicker to embrace you as soon as you embrace them. It doesn't matter if you haven't grown up with them or gone to work or school with them. If you meet someone virtually anywhere and you happen to get along, chances are you'll be able to make a friendship out of it if you choose to. In general, Colombia is much more of a collectivist culture than Australia, as friends and family are held among the most important aspects of life, which brings me to the next thing I miss. Something I also quickly noted upon coming back here was just how much more materialistic my country is. For a lot of Australians, and I assume for people of many other first world countries, there is much more of an apparent obsession with the wealth. It's as though having things like a big house in an affluent area with a flashy car and all that fun stuff is upheld as the pinnacle of life's purpose. Like, I understand that these are things that are highly esteemed anywhere in the world for a lot of people, But the difference with Colombia here is that unlike Australia, I don't think that this is the driving force for a lot of people in their lives. Don't get me wrong, I see a lot of Colombians working their hearts out who don't have a lot of time to socialise. For some it's just to make ends meet, and for others it's to afford a more affluent lifestyle. The difference though is that I don't feel like Colombians see this as their end game like a lot of Australians do. For a lot of people obsessed with pursuing wealth here, it's like the wealth itself is the primary thing they care about, while relationships and people are a secondary interest. In Colombia though, the wealth feels more like a means to an end rather than the end goal itself. I'm fairly confident, for instance, that if a bunch of Colombians and a bunch of Australians told you what their ultimate idea of prosperity was, the average Colombian description would probably have a greater emphasis on friends and family, while the average description in Australia would be far more materialist-centric. I reckon this is fairly evident wherever you go out in public in the city here. In the times I've been out and about since coming back, I've really noticed how people love to show off their wealth, be it with their designer clothes, or expensive cars, or whatever else. Now, to be fair, I realise that Colombia is a second world country, and so a large part of the reason you don't see as many people parading their wealth is simply because there are less wealthy people. But the interesting thing is, this often doesn't seem to change when Colombians move to Australia and start earning Australian dollars. I know quite a few Colombians here, and honestly, I wouldn't say their outlook on life in terms of wealth is much different to the Colombians I know in Colombia. Okay, so I should say that the caveat to all of this would be that Colombia certainly does have its share of superficial people in certain cities more than others, not naming any names. And you may have heard of the gringo hunter culture as well, which certainly exists in places. I think it's important to realise though that the majority of Colombians are not like this. This is just a small subset of people who, let's face it, probably haven't grown up in the happiest of households, but otherwise I found that wealth is far less commonly part of the conversation in Colombia than it is here. I've talked with several people here since coming back who've just gone on and on about the things they're buying, all the things they're planning to buy, all the things they already own, and frankly, I just find it really boring, and I miss the style of conversation in Colombia where people live in the moment a little bit more. But I think you get the idea, so I'll move on to the next pick of things I miss about Colombia, and that is the prices. And it seems so hypocritical that after all that my next point is about something materialistic, but look, there's no escaping the reality of this one. Simply put, Australia is way more expensive than Colombia. This was something that I was immediately reminded of the moment I booked an Uber back to my home from the airport and paid 100 Australian dollars for a 30-minute trip. I mean, that might sound normal to you, but to put this in perspective, I've been using Ubers and taxis all the time in Colombia due to how cheap they are. If I were to take a 30-minute trip in an Uber there, I would be paying around $10. That's 10 times less than Australia. Obviously, it doesn't stop with transport either, like just going to eat out in Colombia, for instance. Most places outside of fine dining don't go much above $10, bar maybe the most expensive menu items on occasion. Meanwhile, here in Australia, just the other week I remember going out for lunch and getting a pita wrap, some chips and a drink, and paying almost $20. Again, that might seem normal to you, but trust me, when you've been in Colombia for a while, you really notice that difference. Also, I know this video is about Australia and Colombia, but I gotta mention the rude awakening I got when I stayed a night in LA on my trip back home. For just a single night near LA airport, the cheapest hotel I could find was nearly 300 Australian dollars for one night. Look, I'm sorry, I know that's probably normal, but after living in Colombia for almost a year where the equivalent hotel would be like 10% of that price, you can see why that stung a little bit. With all that in mind, I think it's a fair warning that if you're planning to stay in Colombia for any decent amount of time, be prepared to have many of these shock moments when you return home, as soon as you remember what first world prices are like. Anyway, closing this one out with the final point I wanted to talk about today, and this one might be a surprise, but honestly, a big thing I miss when back home in Australia are the opportunities to speak Spanish with people. Although I practice on Duolingo every day to keep my Spanish alive, I do miss putting it into practice on a regular basis. I wouldn't say it's something I think about a lot, but I do notice that when the opportunity arises to speak it here, I always leap at the chance. I found even in public places where I hear a stranger speaking Spanish, I always feel very tempted to approach them so I can speak a little. I've actually even given into this urge a handful of times on the bus here, and striking up conversations with randos on public transport is just something I would not do in any other context. I suppose it just goes to show that deep down I really crave these opportunities, even if I don't always consciously realise it. I would say too though that for me personally, understanding Spanish is a lot trickier than speaking it, and so I think being in an environment where everyone around you is constantly speaking it is a good challenge for me. To be brutally honest, I'm not sure that living in Colombia has really improved my Spanish a lot, as the vast majority of what I've learnt has been on Duolingo. Still, it's helpful to be forced into tricky situations like this, as it allows you to get used to thinking on your feet. having to listen to people more intently in order to understand them just isn't a challenge I've been able to have here. I mean, I mentioned my Colombian friends here, and of course I practice when I'm with them, but I tend to find that for whatever reason, friends are generally easier to understand than strangers. Don't get me wrong, I still get a kick out of speaking Spanish with them. It probably just doesn't stretch me as much as it would, say, some random taxi driver in Colombia. But anyway, those were 5 things I miss about Colombia when in Australia, and with that, I think I've dunked on my country enough for today. I realize that this video may make it look as though I think Colombia is just a better country overall, but I want to stress that there are also things I miss about Australia when over there, so maybe that's another video I could do sometime. The whole grass is always greener on the other side phenomena I think is very real, so I think at the end of the day, you just gotta appreciate the things you have and realize that you'd miss them if you didn't. But hey, thanks for watching all this way. If you got something out of this, feel free to like, subscribe, bell, and leave a suggestion for a future topic you'd like to see me cover, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!